Okay, students, good day. So today we're moving on to chapter 9. And this chapter we'll be dealing with grouping students, differentiation in instruction, and the use of technology in education. And for this course, for this particular chapter, we'll be focusing on the elements of effective instruction that is beyond simply just doing a good lesson. We spoke about the elements of a good lesson last couple of lectures. And then we would also look at how students are grouped in order to accommodate their achievement and ability differences. What are some ways that we can differentiate instruction, as well as the risks associated with placing students in specific programs and groups. And then finally, to close off this lecture, we would look at how technology is used today in education to assist with the learning. So let's get right into it. So what are the elements of a good lesson beyond, or good instruction beyond simply a good lesson? The teacher has to be concerned with many additional elements outside of simply presenting information. So the students must know, the teacher must know how to adapt or change or make adjustments to his or her lesson based on the student's knowledge level. So if you start at a particular level and you realize that, wait a minute, the students are not getting it. They are not with you, you're asking questions for feedback and they can't respond. Maybe there's a gap in their knowledge. And so you may need to go back to some previous or foundational knowledge of prior, some prerequisite learning in order to help them to come up to the level and then continue the lesson. Or you might begin a lesson and realize that students have already covered the material where you're at by the questions that you ask and by the responses that you get from the students, and you realize that, wait a minute, they already covered this material, they advanced of this material, so you may need to go a little further. You also need to be aware of student motivation, the importance of motivation. In the next lecture, we'll go into more detail about student motivation or motivating students to learn. So teachers must know that all students have different motivation sets, and sometimes they're interested in learning, sometimes they're not interested in learning, and what is required to have them motivated or driven or interested in learning. Then there might be times when students may be acting or behaving inappropriately in the classroom, or they may be going off task or not focusing on what you want them to focus on at a particular time. And therefore, managing student behavior or classroom management is critical for teachers to know. Then, according to the size of the class and the different abilities in the class, you may need to group students together on different levels and in different ways so that you can deal with separate groups for instruction. So you may have a group of students who might be having some challenges, a group of students who might just be on point, and a small group might be advanced. And how do you treat with the different groups when you're dealing with instruction? This is where differentiation would come into play. And of course, you must know how to assess what you have taught. And there must be that link between the objectives that you set out and the type of way that you go about assessing students. There's no value in assessing students with what you have not taught. Okay, so Carroll puts forth a model of school learning for effective instruction. And the focus in Carroll's model is on time. Time spent on learning will depend on the amount of time that is set aside for the particular instruction. So you may have a math lesson that is on half an hour or 40 minutes, and then you would break down that lesson in terms of what you'll be doing, the questions you'll be asking, the emphasis you'll be placing on laying the foundation on prior learning, making sure that they are ready for the lesson that you're about to teach. Then you would also focus on a period of time for illustration, for questioning, for formative instruction, and then you must have time set aside for practice, a little practice, so that you can identify whether students have learned or not in terms of their independent practice and where they might need assistance. So all that would be part of the quality instruction that you would give, and the time allocated would also depend on the students' perseverance or their ability to focus or pay attention. So based on their age category, you know if it's early childhood or infant one or middle primary or upper primary or middle school, based on the age group that you're dealing with. Or you might be teaching secondary school students, or you might be teaching post-secondary, like A-level students. So depending on where the students are at, you must know that there are differences in focus and attention. So the time spent on learning would vary according to the developmental abilities of the students. Then time needed to learn will depend on the students' attitude. Some students will catch it very quickly. Some students will take a little more time. Some students will need an additional explanation, different examples, different approach, different strategies. And of course, that would be dependent on students' prior knowledge. So if students have a good, in-depth, a wide vocabulary, you'd expect that the reading lesson would move pretty quickly and pretty smoothly with those students, as opposed to those who don't. And as well as the students' ability to learn based on your approach instruction. Slavin also has a model, and his model is the QAIT, QUAIT model, and that deals with the quality of instruction, the appropriateness of the levels of instruction, incentives that you give in the lesson, and of course, another focus again on time. So in terms of Slavin's QAIT model, the quality of instruction, the lesson should make sense to all students. There must be some sort of a connection. They must be able to identify why they need to learn what they're learning. Then the appropriateness of the level of instruction. The lesson shouldn't be way above their heads or way below their level. Because if it's way below their level, they would easily lose interest. Oh, I'm not tired. This is pretty boring. This is pretty simplistic. If it's way above their heads, then it would be frustrating for them to grasp the concepts or the complexity of the ideas that you're trying to communicate. Okay, so the level of instruction must be appropriate. You must pitch the lesson at an appropriate level to meet students' level of understanding or ability. Then in the lesson, there must be some sort of incentive. The lesson must be put over in such a way that students will be motivated to learn the material. It must be interesting. It must be dynamic. It must arouse their curiosity. It must satisfy their curiosity. It must fulfill their desire for cognitive advancement and cognitive development. And sufficient time must be given in terms of the allocated time. The teacher allocates the time, how the teacher utilizes his or her time, and how much time is spent. Sufficient time must be spent for students to be engaged and be on task with what they're learning. So you have to sit down, and all this will be part of your planning process. You sit down, you plan precisely how much time you want students to spend in this part of the lesson, how much time you spend on introduction, how much time you spend on examples, illustrations, doing scaffolding, giving us assistance, and so forth. And the Carroll's QUAIT model of school learning also focuses on the quality of instruction, and which will come from a high quality curriculum. So the quality of the curriculum will determine the quality of instruction. The information must be organized as well. You must know the order and present in an orderly fashion, not in a haphazard manner, because haphazard instruction would lead to haphazard learning, and it must be a clear foundation being laid, and then you building upon that foundation a superstructure. Then the assessment and evaluation must be adapted to the students' needs as well. Appropriate levels of instruction must also be given. So we dealt with the quality of instruction, appropriate levels, and the appropriate levels must be recognized because, as we said before, students have different levels of prior knowledge, skill, motivation. They have different learning rates. The teacher must utilize different assessment and evaluation to identify the instructional levels where students are at. So sometimes you might do a pre-test to see where students are at, and you would identify what level you need to start at, and instruction must also be differentiated as is required. So if you have a class where you have emergent readers, you have competent readers, and you have advanced readers, then you would have to have activities to satisfy the three groups within the class. You must differentiate instruction so that each group will feel satisfied that he or she would have learned at the end of the lesson. So you have a class of 20 students, and you have about 6 or 7 in each category, each of those 3 categories, emergent, competent, and advanced. Then you must have materials for each of the group. You must pitch the lesson so that each group is satisfied and each group can be engaged, and you can move around to each group and see their progress and give them the required assistance. The I is for incentive. Students must be motivated to learn. And 1 is to make learning relevant to students. And again, we emphasized last week, letting students know why. And with that, why they're learning what they're learning and the value of what they're learning, they will be incentivized. Give praise. Use praise judiciously. And we'll speak about that in the next lecture as well. Use praise judiciously. Not just for everything, but to recognize when students do good work or give good responses and give appropriate praise. Feedback is critical. When students do work, give timely feedback. Don't keep their books or their tests or their attempts at whatever it is for weeks and weeks and weeks. Give feedback, make sacrifices, and give feedback in a timely manner. If you have to stay back an hour, 2 hours, just going through their books, but as quickly as possible, give feedback so that they would be more motivated from the feedback based on what they have done to do additional work because they know they're going to get feedback. Many times they have students say, oh, I'm not doing that homework, Miss do correct homework, or so do correct homework, you don't give back books, weeks and weeks and weeks. The grades must be fair grades when grades are given. And at the end of the term, you can give certificates, or at the end of the school year, certificates on a daily basis. You can give stars or prize or weekly incentives. So these are different means of motivating students socially and tangibly. T, teachers must take time to plan for instruction, and then of course, identify the time as we focus on the actual time that is spent in teaching. The amount of time on instruction depends on how effectively the teacher can use classroom management skills. Because if he or she cannot manage the class effectively, then the instructional time, the time allocated for instruction, might be spent on more disciplining students and more getting students in line than actually spending time teaching. But if the teacher is well organized and has interesting activities, a good set induction, and gets in class, starts class on time and say, oh, okay, we have 45 minutes for this lesson on science. And today we're going to talk about the clouds, and we're going to talk about how we get good quality drinking water. We're going to talk about the water cycle. How many of you have ever had a bath in the rain? How many of you have know that the water, where does the water come from that is in our pipes? The water that we drink, what bottled water that we buy, where does that water come from? Where do the companies get the water from? So you can begin with those kinds of interesting questions that arouse students' curiosity. And then you have a time that you spend for that with your diagrams, your illustrations, your questioning, your information. So there's a time for them to listen, a time for them to write, a time for them to interact, a time for them to share, and a time for them to do independent seat work or have independent practice according to the type of lesson. Yes? An interesting experiment, interesting pictures. So you keep these students engaged. And once students are thus engaged at the appropriate levels, then they have very minimal time to get involved in mischief or to go off task because the lesson is interesting, the lesson is engaging. But once there's a lag and time is just going and nothing quality is happening, then students occupy themselves otherwise. How can we group students to accommodate their achievement differences? So they are different because students are different. They come with different knowledge, different skills, different dispositions. And we are trying for all students to be able to have a good quality learning experience. How do we do that? We can do between class ability grouping, on tracking, regrouping for reading and mathematics, and within class ability grouping. tracking. This is identified as the least effective and it's being diminished in its use. And tracking, where students are assigned a particular track, they take a particular course sequence. It is supposed to be homogeneous in terms of performance level as well. So we might track or stream students according to their ability to perform. So all the bright kids might be in one class, all the average kids might be in one class, and all the challenged or struggling students might be in another class. Or there might be those who on a college prep track or general track or vocational track. And students quickly identify which track they're in, and sometimes it causes problems for those who are identified in the low status or the lower level tracks. Sometimes teachers don't want to go to those classes that are streamed with very weak students who have reading abilities, literacy abilities, numeracy, illiteracy abilities. Okay, so we have to be careful of that approach. The between class ability grouping, where you have students from different classes coming together based on their ability for a particular subject. Research, it's clearly identified, research doesn't support this use. And there are variation, one class by general ability. So you'd have students who would be in a class according to ability from the different classes. We pull them together, and ability for each subject. So you have a different math class. So at a level, you might have the struggling students all in one math class, the better students in another, and so on. So the between class, so they would be together for certain activities, and then they are grouped for certain subject areas. Some of the negatives, decisions for inclusions based on general ability, not on a particular subject area. So sometimes they're placed in a class based on their general ability, but they might be good in specific subject areas. And in the lower level classes, the weaker classes, there are a lack of role models. Teachers identify the weaker classes as struggling students, and sometimes those teachers have very low expectations, and teacher expectations are very powerful in terms of the quality of work that teachers put out and the level of performance of students, all being negative. The curriculum is narrowed to focus on more facts and fewer concepts because we know these are struggling students. Little effort is made to differentiate instruction in these classes because you don't feel that, because we think that OBE is a homogeneous group. And then also little effort is made to utilize different teaching strategies, and more of the same is basically done. These students are often stigmatized as well, and the majority of these between ability classes end up being filled with low socioeconomic status students. Those are the weaker classes. Techniques for untracking. Well, to untrack students, sometimes students are regrouped for reading and mathematics. So they leave the mixed ability classroom for instruction in homogeneous settings for a short amount of time and then return to the original classrooms. The drop-in plan allows students from mixed ability classrooms to be regrouped across grades in the same classroom for reading instruction at the class level, and that may have advanced grade, third grade, and fourth grade readers. So you have this mixed ability classroom being regrouped across grade levels based on their reading level. Their reading level is identified. First, they're assessed, and then they're placed in groups based on their reading levels. Further techniques for untracking, non-grade and cross-age group. Students work across age lines, but this might be flexible, flexibly in terms of, allow for flexibility in terms of their group for specific instructions based on their particular needs. So if a particular need is identified, if a particular weakness is identified, they can be based in non-graded cross-age groupings. Within class ability groupings can be utilized in mathematics and reading instruction. So within the class, different groups are provided based on the need for guided reading and so on. So you may have 3 or 4 groups as identified earlier in a class, and you deal with them accordingly. Retention, low achieving students are sometimes allowed or required to repeat a grade. So these are some of the techniques for untracking students, right? When we don't use tracking. Differentiating instruction. As a teacher, you will encounter students, as we said, with different levels of abilities, and you need to offer appropriate instruction. So when we differentiate instruction, we are teaching to accommodate the different needs of a diverse student population within a regular class. And how do we differentiate? We differentiate in terms of content. We differentiate in terms of the level that we require students to perform at. We differentiate at the pace at which we expect students to progress. And we differentiate in terms of the expectations or the assessments or the products of the instruction. So what we expect from one student would be different from what we expect from another at a lower or higher level. And what how we approach the lesson for those who are struggling will be different from how we approach for the ones who are more advanced. So we differentiate, we give differences according to where students are at in order to meet their diverse needs in a regular classroom. Some techniques for differentiation may include peer tutoring, where we have students working one-on-one with each other, cross-age tutoring, where we have older students helping the younger ones, and the best, most effective method would be individual tutoring by teachers themselves, right? Where the teacher would deliberately sit with a child who's struggling with reading or with math and work through some strategies, identify where the child is at. And this is very effective. That one-on-one approach is very effective. Okay, so there are some education programs that exist for students who are at risk for failure, at risk for dropping out of school. And many times students who are at risk are diverse and might be students who are facing with dire socioeconomic circumstances. So we have compensatory education, early intervention programs, and then we have special education programs. Yes, so the at-risk educational programs will include compensatory education, early intervention programs, and sometimes special education. And these students, of course, need special assistance. Right. Okay. So the compensatory programs would be programs like Head Start, where students are given assistance in reading and basic literacy and so forth at the preschool age. And these students would have come from low socioeconomic backgrounds, low income backgrounds, to help them to achieve school readiness. And this program has been identified as a very successful program, the Head Start program, and allows students to catch up with their more advanced or regular peers. And the Title I makes extra services available to low achieving students. And of course, again, many of them would have come from low income families. And these extra services will include special tutoring opportunities and continuous progress education plan, where you can see where the students move from one stage to the next. The comprehensive or school-wide reforms, those programs would include looking at the school's curriculum, looking at the instruction that is given, the types of assessment that are done, how students are grouped, the accommodations that are required for students with difficulties, and how we can get the parents involved. So sometimes what is required for a particular school or group of schools might be a comprehensive school reform program. So let's, instead of simply letting schools and students go through the learning process, just go through the routine or the rudiments of the learning in a sort of a rote fashion, a comprehensive school-wide reform would make a big difference, where you would look at the whole curriculum and make adjustment, because the school is not performing, the students are not performing, they're dropping out of school, they're leaving school with little or no qualifications, and they either become unemployable, disadvantaged in the workplace, or less of a benefit to society because of their weak educational background. So comprehensive, a CSR program can assist with that. Oh, so how do we use technology in education these days? Technology can be used by teachers, where teachers use a wide range of technological approaches. This is one, using Zoom and PowerPoint combined in order to record this lecture and make it available and accessible to students. Teachers can use multimedia presentation software, for presenting, for assessing lessons, for assessing, etc. Students use word processing, and they use different learning platforms to learn and to prepare presentations and to do research. Then there's computer-assisted instruction in the form of drill and practice that students can use. And of course, the teachers and administrators can also use technology for administrative tasks, reaching out to parents, recording students' grades, setting examinations, the whole works, keeping track of student progress. So technology in the classroom, you can use computers, word processors, spreadsheets, presentation software, interactive whiteboards, even online learning could have interactive whiteboards and interactive responses, electronic response devices where students are allowed to work on items at their own level and their own pace, do exams within class with clickers, etc. So there's technology for learning. And technology for learning would include the use of word processing and desktop publishing, use of spreadsheets and databases, use of computer-assisted instruction where students can go through lessons, go through learning at their own pace, at their own time, online, or with a computer-based software. Of course, the internet is there for students to do research, to experience edutainment, multimedia uses for presentation, integrated learning systems, where students can use systems like Canvas, Moodle, Blackboard, etc., and other computer programs. Students can use the internet, and that would help them with education applications, simulations of things that they're learning, web quests, where learners can seek information on different subjects, different topics, problem-solving programs that can help them to develop critical thinking skills, multimedia projects, instead of the old-fashioned paper and pencil and chart report or project, and of course, integrated learning systems, as we mentioned previously. Well, Web 2.0 has a lot of tools, blogs, wikis, RSS feeds, podcasts, social networking, and management software that students can have access to, and that can be used not only for entertainment, but to enhance learning. Instructional television and embedded multimedia. Have brief segments of video content threaded into lessons. Something you can use YouTube in lessons, or you can use different software, cartoon software. You can construct something. You can use TikTok. You can use any social media platform that is appropriate. You can use it within your classes. Assistive technology, like the guide you see in the picture here, can be used where students have certain physical disabilities or challenges, and they have different devices and mechanisms that they can use to assist them. The guy is using a stylus, using his mouth to read or to write. Computer-assisted tutoring, one-on-one, or small group tutoring, with closely aligned computer software. So technology applications where all students can access and do exams online, use their devices, tune into classes, read text, etc. And of course, you have where students with technology, students can bring their own devices, they can be blended learning, where there's a combination of face-to-face teaching as well as online learning, synchronous as well as asynchronous. You have the flipped classroom where all the work is done before class, and then you come to class to discuss and to develop skills and to build projects. Of course, digital homework, where you get assistance from places like Khan Academy online. So there are some challenges to integrating technology in the classroom, because not everyone has the same access to technology, access to Wi-Fi, access to online learning. There might be cyberbullying. Sometimes phones are used inappropriately in classes. The safety and security of all students is sometimes threatened. In net use, teachers can make use of email, discussion boards, web tutoring, web authoring, of course, professional development that are available online. And of course, the administrative arm of education can use the audio and visual video conferencing like Zoom and other platforms, Google Classroom. But of course, always bearing in mind is that the digital divide exists between those who are advantaged and those who are less advantaged in terms of the students having access. So educators must do all in their power in order to have as many students access learning as is required. Okay, so that's basically what we covered today for our chapter 9, which dealt basically with grouping students, differentiation in instruction, and technology use in education. We want to emphasize again that teaching is more than just presenting a good lesson. Sometimes we need to group students so that they can achieve their best success. The way that we go about grouping or differentiating instruction is important because we want to meet students and satisfy their needs for learning and development. Paying attention to how students are grouped in terms of different grouping strategies. Some are more successful than others, and experimentation must be done because most times the students who need the assistance the most are disadvantaged when grouping is taking place, and there can be some stigmatization attached to it. And of course, we have to embrace the technology and use the technology well to enhance learning across all platforms, across all age groups, so that overall the products of education can devolve into healthy citizens who will contribute successfully to advancing and developing society. Okay, so thank you very much.